Welcome to this explainer for the May 23rd HealthTech Dose. Today, we're diving deep into the massive gap between the illusion of AI competence and the actual friction of clinical reality. I mean, we keep seeing these breathtaking headlines, right? AI passing medical board exams, generating trial protocols in literal seconds. It kind of makes it feel like the autonomous future of medicine is arriving tomorrow. But as we're going to explore today, there is a severe last-mile problem in clinical AI, and it's completely reshaping how we think about phase 1 through 3 trials and real patient care. So, is AI actually ready to replace your doctor? To truly understand this last-mile problem, we really have to challenge our biggest assumptions about how close we are to autonomous AI in healthcare. Because it's incredibly easy to look at those high benchmark scores and assume, hey, diagnostic precision automatically equals treatment precision. But translating that code into practical, bedside utility, that remains a massive and frankly, sometimes dangerous hurdle. Okay, think about it this way. This analogy perfectly frames our entire discussion. If you drop a 1,000 horsepower hypercar that absolutely shatters speed records on a pristine, climate-controlled test track right into downtown traffic, dodging potholes and pedestrians on a rainy Tuesday, it stalls out. And honestly, that is exactly what happens with AI in the clinic. The algorithm is the hypercar, the benchmark test is the pristine track, and the messy reality of a busy hospital floor, that's your rainy Tuesday traffic. Section 1, the illusion of competence and the diagnostic utility gap. Let's look at why superhuman code routinely fails on the hospital floor despite its brilliant underlying math. We already know AI is crushing medical exams, and new data actually shows its diagnostic lead over human doctors grows as a patient moves from ER triage, where information is super sparse and AI sits at about 67% accuracy, to full admission, where a clearer clinical picture bumps it up to 82%. On paper, this looks like a massive win for the machines, right? But why doesn't that 82% accuracy automatically solve the problem? Well, benchmark tests act like static, closed-book exams. They feed the AI a pristine paragraph of symptoms, but that completely misses the open, messy, iterative reality of treating a patient on the hospital floor. A patient in the ER might be unconscious, or maybe they just give incredibly vague answers, and the human triage nurse has to dig for the rest. AI is currently optimized for multiple choice answers, not actionable human-led protocols. Let me give you a really concrete example of why this matters so much. Imagine a sophisticated AI model accurately predicts a 32% risk for a complication like postpartum depression. That's mathematically precise, but that number is totally useless on the clinic floor without a clear, human-centered action pathway. If the nurse or doctor doesn't have a protocol tied to that 32%, like do they admit the patient, do they call a social worker, do they prescribe medication, then the AI's diagnostic edge literally just vanishes in the friction of reality. As this powerful quote from a recent paper in Science underscores, we're building world-class diagnostic oracles that output percentages the clinic floor legally and practically cannot use. Knowing what will happen and knowing what to do about it are just not the same thing. The AI is handing out percentages, but human healthcare operates on strict, actionable thresholds. So if benchmark scores don't guarantee clinical utility, we kind of have to look closely at how these AI models are gaming those scores in the first place. Section 2, the synthesis blind spot and poisoned wells. Let's look at a fascinating mechanistic flaw here. When evaluating AI on clinical reasoning, researchers noticed a huge gap. A model's top single answer was correct about 66% of the time, but if you let it provide 10 answers, it was right 81% of the time. Why? Because AI mathematically optimizes to avoid false negatives. It has absolutely zero innate concept of human cost or hospital resources. So it relies on what we call exhaustive enumeration, basically spamming 30 different lab tests and procedures for a single Crohn's disease case, just to statistically guarantee it hits the grading rubric's correct answer. It's terrible medicine, but it gets rewarded by flawed evaluation frameworks. And this evidence synthesis blind spot gets much worse when we look at how these systems handle scientific literature. A recent study evaluated freely available AI tools to see if they could recognize retracted scientific literature, studies pulled for fraud or deep methodological flaws. Notice how ChatGPT-5 performed the best, but it still only got it right about 53% of the time. Incredibly, research-focused AI tools like SciSpace and Consensus failed 100% of the time. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. We are dealing with a poisoned well. Because AI fundamentally lacks an innate philosophical understanding of research integrity, it just sees text that mathematically matches its statistical prediction. It confidently weaves fabricated, retracted science right into its outputs. Now, if a pharmaceutical company uses an AI assistant to help design a multi-million-dollar trial, and the foundational evidence is built on retracted science, that trial is doomed before the first patient even signs a consent form. And if we can't trust an AI to synthesize historical evidence safely today, how can we possibly expect a single, frozen algorithm to survive the complex, constantly changing reality of a 10-year clinical trial? Section 3. The myth of static models and snapshot degradation. This introduces a concept called snapshot degradation. There's this persistent Silicon Valley mindset to gather data, train a model, freeze it, and then scale it. But biology aggressively resists being frozen. Think about your own health 5 years ago compared to today. As patients age, develop new comorbidities, or as revolutionary new standard of care drugs hit the market, traditional static prediction models suffer from snapshot degradation. The map simply no longer matches the territory. To combat this degradation, researchers are actually building dynamic, evolving models. For example, a recent study highlighted the ESRD-DRS model for predicting end-stage renal disease or kidney failure in patients with diabetes. Instead of a frozen snapshot, this model actively refits and recalculates risk at natural clinical milestones, 1, 5, and 10 years after diagnosis. It's a massive step forward in algorithm design for sure. But here is the terrifying friction of reality. When you look closely at the data powering that dynamic model, a shocking 80% of the crucial UACR biomarker data, which is a vital urine test for kidney function, was missing from the real-world health records. Because it was missing, that data had to be mathematically imputed, basically guessed, by the system. This is a massive blind spot. If 80% of your critical evidence is mathematically fabricated because the real-world clinic was just too understaffed to run or record the urine test, the AI isn't actually tracking the patient's physical progression. It's dynamically recalibrating a hallucination of health. You literally cannot drop a mathematically fabricated foundation into the chaos of a real hospital and expect it to survive. This severe reliance on missing data and the inability to synthesize action completely dismantles the idea of AI as an autonomous decision-making oracle in medicine. But hey, it doesn't mean the technology is useless, right? Which brings us to Section 4, the lightweight collaborator, copilots over oracles. Our fundamental relationship to this technology has to shift. Instead of an all-knowing oracle flying the plane, AI must be integrated as a lightweight collaborator. It sits in the co-pilot seat, rapidly pulling up charts and offering hypotheses, but it explicitly knows its own mathematical limits, and it's bounded by continuous human auditing and strict medical legal protocols. And when we frame it this way as an expert-in-the-loop co-pilot, AI is achieving massive, measurable real-world wins. A recent trial showed it actually reduced radiology interpretation times by over 18%. In clinical development, Bayer used AI to predict long-term risks for a stroke drug, cutting thousands of participants from a late-stage trial and saving up to 9 months in volunteer recruitment. And systems like Google's new co-scientist are actively generating valid hypotheses for drug repurposing. You can see how this philosophy builds directly into Google's actual co-scientist architecture. Step 1 starts with human goal definition. Then, multiple specialized AI agents debate and rank hypotheses in a tournament-style structure. But notice step 4. It still requires rigorous human peer review to validate those findings and run the final in vitro experiments. The human remains the ultimate backstop against hallucinations and retracted science. Ultimately, modernizing clinical development isn't about replacing scientists with machines. It's really about building adaptable systems that flag when data is missing, understand resource constraints, and rely on pre-specified human fallback protocols the exact second the algorithm hits the limits of its training. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. The next time you see a sensational headline about an AI curing a complex disease or acing another medical board exam, ask yourself this. Are we just blindly trusting the horsepower of the AI engine, or are we actively checking if the car has the suspension to survive the messy reality of the hospital floor? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking the hard questions.